So, hurrah! Welcome to another episode of the Good Listening To podcast. And I'm very, very excited to have in the clearing, ladies and gentlemen, Eloise Leeson. When I first heard your name, it made me think of Liam Neeson, which is a completely different spelling. And you
It
have
is.
a bit of a spoonerism. And there's
It is.
obviously no relation because Liam Neeson has nothing to do with Eloise Leeson. See what we're
Which
doing?
is frankly a shame because I think he'd be an excellent boxing acting partner of some persuasion.
Absolutely brilliant. And what we're going to be doing, by the way, I've invited Eloise, who is a linguist who runs a company called Olim.com. And I'm intrigued. We have had a brief discussion about what Olim means, and I'd like you to get on the open road of explaining that because it's got quite an exciting connection to what I think of as being one of the most exciting things about Shakespearean prologues and the function back in the day they had. But anyway, so yes, Eloise is a linguist. We've had a couple of connections on LinkedIn. She and I both have a lovely man called Dave Stewart from Fresh Air Leadership in common. And we just have had a couple of really interesting conversations. So it was just a natural segue to bringing you into the Good Listening To podcast clearing. So good morning, Eloise, and how's morale? How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really good. I'm not going to lie. I have cried more in the last week than I have in the last 6 months combined. I'm not normally a crier. But I think with everything going on in the world at the moment and the renewed lockdown that's coming through, I definitely did a couple of very ugly open mouth, square mouth, crying. But other than that, I woke up this morning and despite the fog is so bad here in Scotland, it made the news, which goes to show just how rock and roll my home nation actually is. But yeah, other than that, actually really very good and delighted to be here. So no, all good here.
Any tears of joy in amongst that? Because, of course, the political landscape has changed quite significantly, hasn't it?
I think I drank the tears of joy, which was champagne. So I put a bottle in the fridge and thought to myself, you know what, one way or another, I think it was Bonaparte has the most wonderful quote, which is that in victory you deserve champagne, but in defeat you need it. So I thought one way or another, we would need something of the fizzy persuasion.
I
So
mean, whose quote was that? I love that.
it was Napoleon Bonaparte, I believe. Not that I think I should probably be advocating for his approach to things, but out of his many catchphrases, I do believe that is my favourite. So
Similarly, I've always been a bit nervous about quoting Nietzsche. One of his quotes is,
yeah.
"The best ideas happen outdoors." But people in history have said some cool shit, even though they may not have done
They
very
have,
cool shit.
even if their actions have been reprehensible.
Lovely.
So yeah.
And in fact, talking about cause and effect, one of the main thrusts of Olim I've experienced is you're closing the gap between what people think they're saying and what's actually received, which links to that lovely quote, "It's not what you say, it's what people hear." So that was another hook I had in wanting to talk to you. So what's your journey to the clearing that you find yourself in currently in your life's work? So do you want to just go on the open road and tell our lovely audience about Olim
I would
community?
love to. I would love to. So how far back down the open road do we go? She says, making a face.
You can go back to I was born at an early age if you want to go.
I was born at an early age. I hear. Skipped childhood. No. Grew up on an island. Didn't. I suppose really the linguistics journey started when I went to university. And like any sort of young person who did it, I'll do French and history because I'm good at them at school. Not really questioning for a minute if I wanted to do French or be an historian or anything like that. And when I got to university, I went to the University of Aberdeen, a wonderful place, and the filler courses that you have to take, linguistics was an option. And the first course I did was an introduction to morphology. And it's about sense making. It's about the way that certain...
Did you just say morphology?
Morphology, yes.
Lovely, yeah.
Sense making. So it varies. So there's a lot about so the introduction to linguistics covers things like morphology, phonology, syntax and semantics, and then you look at dialects and sociolects and the way that language is so intertwined with culture. They're almost inseparable. And one of the big things that really caught me about linguistics was how clear it suddenly made everything. It's about making a subconscious toolkit that we all have overt and conscious. And I like to say I was seduced by linguistics, and I did a couple of years of the French and history. I then went to Corsica to teach French in a high school in the north in La Balagne for my sins, and had a really interesting year there, and it absorbed as much of the language as I could. And then I came back to university and I thought, I don't want to do French Nouvelle Vague feminist criticism of the 1940s cinema. So I ditched it all, and I went directly for the linguistics. And having spent a year in Corsica, where there's a really interesting diglossia, which means two languages at play within one society, a diglossia of French and Corsican. It was really interesting.
Another new word to me, diglossia.
Diglossia. To mean.
Can I just thank you for morphology? I'd just like to thank you for morphology and diglossia. I like your linguistic view. This is good.
But so with the diglossia, you get a kind of a what people would label maybe as an acrolect or a high language, and then a basilect, which is a low language. And typically they're categorized into things like, an acrolect would be the language of law or of medicine or of power, for example. So education, law, medicine and things like that would be typically used in the high language, usually of a ruling class or a conqueror. And then the basilect is the language of agriculture, farming, expletives, the home, family, powerful emotions. And typically, I noticed with my students was that, we would obviously use French in school when we weren't trying to learn English. And then they would often slip into Corsican when they were speaking with their friends, or they were talking about home, or they were referring to things. And Corsica is a very, very interesting place to be politically and sort of in terms of identity. So then that got me thinking in the last 2 years of my degree, language and identity and sort of language, and do we form our identity based on the language that we speak, or does the language that we speak inform our identity? So there's a really interesting sort of they're two sides of the same coin effectively, but it basically sparked a curiosity about how can we use language as a way of sort of self-defining and sort of navigating our identities, and then how does that apply to business? So this was the kind of conclusion that took me 10 years to reach. But I left university and then promptly, ironically, began working a fantastic job as a project officer for the university, where I taught students how to get jobs. So I kind of feel like the interview process was me showing I could do the job. But the Star Award, as it was known, the students taking active roles, was such a privilege to be a part of. And I met so many amazing students, and I was able to undergo workshops with them and plan things for them. And, that was an amazing experience just to meet and to try and support as many people as I could. And I still keep in touch with a lot of students today, which has just been tremendous. That was a couple of years. And then I left there, and then I joined the team that launched Deliveroo into Scotland, just a casual 90-degree angle from the academic
my post-it note paper, by happy weird coincidence, is Deliveroo brand today.
Yeah, exactly. A very, that excellent Pantone teal. I used to be able to remember the name of the kind of the color code, which is not a cool thing to admit to, Chris. And so helped to launch Deliveroo into Scotland. And I think typical startup, I burned myself out. They're a great company. They do a lot of really good things. And I think a lot goes on behind the scenes that people don't necessarily perhaps consider or appreciate. So anyway, so that was a real lesson, sort of education christening by fire. And then I discovered I was a terrible advertising salesperson. So I left Deliveroo and got a job in media, and discovered I'm really bad at asking for money over the phone. And that's not to put any shade on people I've worked with in the past. I was just rubbish, just truly, truly awful. So after 6 months of that, I got a very polite, "We love you, but you need to leave," which is totally fine, absolutely within their rights to say that. And then I wound up getting a job at Lululemon.
As the expression has it, you've had your exit managed.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much. Yes, my exit was very honestly and gracefully managed. And then I got a job selling yoga pants to the upper echelon of Edinburgh's yoga pant wearing society through Lululemon. And that was really.
I'm assuming that's not where you met Dave Stewart.
Sadly not, no, although I think he'd look lovely in spandex. Dave, if you're listening, my apologies in advance for that.
It's an image we don't need to conjure, really.
I'm sure he did lovely. So that was actually a really interesting pause to stop and think, is this what I want? Where do I want to go? I had done a lot of reacting once I had left the university, and I'd done a lot of I need to do this and I need to do that, because you have bills to pay, you have things to look after, and I sort of had the chance to pause and think, this is where I'm going, where I want to be going. And then I was headhunted by a brilliant brand agency called Lux, and Lux are a real powerhouse of people who do a brilliant job with food and drink branding specifically. And my past Deliveroo experience and the kind of focus I'd had with the magazine that I'd worked for, a lot of it had obviously delivery was purely focused on food and restaurants, and then the magazine, there was a bit of that in there as well. But I'd always been really interested in the hospitality and the food and drink scene. Never any good at being a part of that. You know, I was a rubbish bartender, couldn't pour a pint to save my life, and would frequently forget orders, which is not a good thing to admit to. But I have so much respect for people who do work in the hospitality industry of any kind, because I think there is so much hard work that happens in there. And I love meeting people behind the bar and meeting the restaurateurs and chefs and all of these different things, and have such appreciation for how hard people work. So when Lux had mentioned that there was a role that was coming up and would I be interested, it was a no-brainer. You know, I had actually wanted to join them as a business for a really long time before then. I loved that they were food and drink specific, and a lot of their campaigns were really cool. So I got to work with companies like Edinburgh Gin, got to do some strategic research for people like Brewdog, and all through these various different things is the thread of linguistics and taking that subconscious toolkit and making it conscious. So if working as a publicist and doing sell-ins on occasion, you can get beyond a lot of barriers if you can make someone laugh within the first sort of 5 seconds of a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, if you can be a little bit self-deprecating and not come off as an asshole, then you're going to open a lot more doors than someone who just sort of pompously wanders in and shouts, I have a news story. No one likes that. Don't do that. But
I love the irony of linguistics, and if you have too much Edinburgh Gin or too much Brewdog, your linguistics will get slightly slippery.
They will. Yes, it's a quick route to being a sloppy linguist, and also possibly an unfiltered linguist, which is another dangerous thing.
Linguist, nice. And by the way, what I love in your Olim Comms website, what's the actual website called?
It is olimcomms.com. Yeah.
Olim Comms is it's really bish bash bosh, because you said every word counts, and that's the real fascination in the precision of linguistics, which is very intriguing, and it's all about clarity.
It is all about clarity.
And also looking at the website, and I will give you a chance at the end to specifically say where we can find out more about you.
Oh, I'd love
but I was thinking you're very much going for salmon pink as the background colour.
I am. Yeah, classic millennial. So the joy of Lux was that it was such an education into the world of business as an agency. So again, agency people, I think secretly we probably all do work really hard, and once you get under the skin of certain industries and certain sectors, you see how hard people work. But working with really small businesses, I think my favorite client ever was the Bay Fish and Chip Shop, based in Stonehaven, voted the Lonely Planet's Bay Fish and Chip Shop. Mark that. If anyone takes anything away from this particular call, let it not be linguistics, let it be the UK's best fish and chips. But it was a fantastic education. I learned a huge amount, and made some really great friendships and relationships. And then my partner at the time, he had been offered to go to Toronto to do some work over there with his company, and said, did I fancy a sabbatical to Toronto for 6 months? And like any sensible, well-functioning human, I said, yeah, I would really like that. So we went to Toronto, and that was in July of last year, so July 2019. And I did that whole, I'm here on a tourist visa. I can't go out and get the retail job or the whatever it is that I'd normally do, to try and make ends meet. But I, kind of thought to myself, if I was ever going to go freelance, now is the time to do that. So I sat down and had a quiet crisis of, again, another square, open mouth, ugly cry, to say there's, what could I possibly offer? And after a while, I thought, well, I sort of vaguely know how to write a news story, and I have a real interest in food and drink. I'll try and pitch food stories to various different food and drink editors, and that bombed just horrendously. It's a hard game, and you need to be relentless and really driven with it. And then I did a few sort of bits and pieces, and was working pro bono as a board member of a charity. I was doing a lot of social media campaigns and things for them, and using a lot of what I'd learned in various different roles. And then it sort of struck me in about November, December of last year that actually I have some really good results, and I have some really good feedback from people who have said, that was actually thanks, you really helped me to understand what it is I'm trying to say. And then this sort of idea of a consultancy was born, that was, well, we all seem to have a really, really hard time confirming if what we're saying is landing with the person we're saying it to in the way that we intend it to. Because you lose count in life of how many conversations you have where someone is confused or offended, and you go, no, I didn't mean that. Or you have an email that comes off and you look like a bit of a dick. Or you write a text and all of a sudden your best friend's like, I'm sorry, what did you mean with your upside down smiley face emoji? There are so many layers. There's so much nuance in language that we all have such a hard time understanding ourselves, let alone trying to help someone else understand us. So the idea for Olim was born really out of linguistic frustration. And I think that this is where this is my very long way of rounding out the point that our language and our identity are inextricably linked. They are the same thing. And how we use that language and how we're receptive to other people's language helps us to make sense of them and treat them with respect. And that's one of the biggest things that I think the consultancy tries to do, or what I try to do for my clients, is to say, right, tell me who you think you are and tell me how it is that you want to be received by your clients. Because right now, you're not getting the results that you think you want. And that's obvious, you're not getting the results that you think you want. So it may be that you have an inherited story about who it is that you think you are that actually isn't serving you. Or it might be that you're missing out on an opportunity because you're so focused on trying to fit the mold of what you think an accountancy should be, or that you think a development company should be, or a coach or a trainer. And actually what you've not done is you've not paused to say, is this true? Does this feel correct for me? And if it does, am I saying it in a way that other people can receive the messages that I'm putting out there? So that's why the website says every word counts, because it does. And because we do close the gap between what it is that we think we're saying and what's actually being received.
And the Olim, as we discussed, is the start of a story, isn't it, in the direction?
It is. So Olim is a Latin phrase that I stumbled across a couple of years ago, and Olim was usually used at the start of a declaration of some kind. So it was basically Latin for everyone, shut up and listen. We're about to say something really important. It has connotations of also being once upon a time, but effectively it was used to start some kind of rhetoric to which it would be worth your time to listen. So,
and coming full circle to what I mentioned about what I connected to with that as the function back in the day in the Shakespearean bear pits, where people were, bear baiting, shagging, throwing tomatoes, just being a bit debauched. The prologue would come on and it was time to get everyone to look, shut your faces, stop it, stop shagging, listen.
No, don't.
Explain in a bish bash bosh, 14 line way why you need to shut your face and listen. And my favourite prologue is the Romeo and Juliet, two households. Both alike and dignity. I won't do the whole thing. But anyway, there was a lovely connection in, yes, I get Olim. And it's very exciting to just have a bish bash bosh, intention to be clear.
Happy to.
So, Eloise, welcome to the Good Listening To podcast clearing. So we're going to bring you into a clearing, first of all, and it's a metaphor that's open to interpretation. What would you say? And you mentioned you've been to Canada, you went to Aberdeen to university. I know whereabouts in Scotland are you based now?
I'm based in the jewel in the crown of the borders. I live in Peebles.
Peebles, lovely.
Peebles.
So where is, in all of your experience, where is a clearing for you, either metaphorically, geographically, or literally?
So I think it's, can I have two clearings? Am I allowed?
You can be greedy, but yes.
Greedy. Okay, well, I will be greedy and I'll have two clearings. So the first clearing is on a plain somewhere in the Taos, near the Taos Mountain in New Mexico. I had the great privilege to go and visit New Mexico. There's that for a segue answer. Great privilege to go and visit New Mexico, visiting a friend of mine who lives in the States about 6 years ago, and had never experienced any kind of desert ever in my entire life. And staying with friends who had a trailer out in the desert, and the clearing was just beautiful desert, woody, scrubby herb, and then massive wide open sky. And if you set a timer and an alarm for 2:30 in the morning, and you stagger out of bed and you open your eyelids and you gaze at the stars, it's an amazing experience. I watched a storm happen in Colorado because it's so clear you can see into another state, which is just madness. But New Mexico is a fantastic place. And the other clearing is probably
and just hold that clearing thought before we go into the next one. I love that you're the first person on the Good Listening To podcast to talk about a desert plain. So I thank you for that.
Oh, pleasure. And the other one, just to kind of turn the tables completely, is probably a soggy field somewhere in the borders where I did lots of, stomping around growing up, being a moody adolescent and feeling like no one understood me and my bohemian tendencies. Oh. But a clearing of some kind, something green, something verdant. Yeah, that's definitely what I think of.
You're making me think of Eustacia Vi from The Good Native, I think is the name of the book, the Thomas Hardy one. Is it The Good Native? The Return of the Native. Sorry. That was I don't know where that came from. That's sort of a slightly random reference. We'll both have to look that up.
Yeah,
So
we will definitely.
awkward. So there you are in your clearing. So you can choose now. Am I joining you with a metaphorical tree? And it's nice because there's a bit of a Joshua tree intent if you'll let me into your desert plain, or we can go into a soggy field with a tree.
I think we should crack on with the desert plain.
And I hope I didn't sort of, influence that as being that's where I wanted to go. But
no, not at all, not at all. No. I think deserts are good places for stories. As just as a segue, if anybody reads Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, first of all, every single human being should read it because it's a phenomenal book. Second of all, it's also fascinating as a linguist in terms of the layers of story and anthropology and the way we make sense out of our own psyches. Yeah. But also, good things happen in deserts. They're places for unpacking and unpeeling and removing the layers of things. They're places of journey and pilgrimage.
And in Breaking Bad, lots of place to bury people.
There's tons of meth, man. Just load. That's what will just be smacked off our faces. No, not to, it's a very serious issue, but yes.
Yes, the Women Who Run with the Wolves is indeed a seminal, awesome book about the sort of wonderment of femininity. I used to think the male antidote to that was Men Who Bark at the Moon, but
which I haven't read and need to.
Sure. So we're in your clearing now, and we're going to, and thank you for letting us into your desert, we're going to shake your tree now to see which apples fall out. And the apples take the form of a storytelling exercise that I actually got from Dave Stewart just to amplify him again. I get to be a circle with a flip chart, metaphorically, with Dave Stewart in the Fresh Air Leadership Company. I'm not doing this program just to plug him, but I need to amplify.
He's great, and everyone should say hi, by the way.
Yes. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is where you've had 5 minutes to think about 4 things that have shaped you, 3 things that inspire you, 2 things, Eloise, that never fail to grab your attention, and then 1 quirky or unusual fact about you that we couldn't possibly know until you decide to tell us. So don't panic, we don't have to sort of flaunt the apples down in a wanna, but it's your tree to shake. Which apple would you like to chomp into first?
I think we should talk about the 4 things that shape a person.
Let's do that.
Person specifically. So I think, well, the first thing that comes to mind is family, obviously. And my family are mental. And I think that's one of the best ways to put it. We grew up here in the borders. We moved from England. So that's why I should have really done an accent caveat when I started this. Everyone does you're Scottish, but you sound wrong, which is fine. But yeah, so we moved up when I was about 5 years old to the borders. I have a younger brother, Robbie, and my parents. So we're a very close family.
So hearing understanding is one brother.
One brother, yes, yeah. So there are four Leesons of peoples, and I think one of the things that really formed us as a family was my parents did a really good job of making sure that we were interested, and she says egotistically, but it's sort of interested, curious people. And we did that by always kind of sitting down at the table, which I realize is a massive privilege. My mum stayed at home, dad would go to work, and then he'd come back. It's very traditional. And we would always have dinner together. And now, granted, that would be, me talking about how I'd avoided being stabbed with a crayon at primary school. But there was always an interesting conversation. And I think when people make you feel like you are worth being interested in, you start to become interested in other people, and vice versa. And I think that kind of the art, not the art of conversation, but the experience of holding a conversation is something I will always be so grateful to my parents for giving me, because we were always taught that you're not ever too busy to stop and talk to someone, and that everybody is worth your time and attention. And I think that's been a really, really big formation of my upbringing. And we went to People's High School, which was brilliant, fantastic education, and just very...
People's High School, sorry, I was just
People's High School, yeah, People's High School. And I think that it's one of those things where, and I don't know how to go, whether I should go too deep into this, but a lot of people when I got to university heard the way that I talked and said, oh, so which school did you go to? Which school did you go to? And I said, I went to People's High School. And they were like, oh, where's that? And it was this immediate assumption that because of the way I spoke, that I automatically must have gone to a private school. And I resented that massively when I got to university. I think because it was the idea that I was only worth knowing if I'd gone to a private school. So I kind of arrived with an automatic, not a chip on my shoulder that I hadn't gone to a private school, but that I had, because of the way I sounded, that must have been. And I think what annoyed me was people drawing immediate conclusions about who I was based on, very limited information. And that hopefully as well has then filtered into the linguistic side of things, which is that we do actually all draw down these immediate impressions of people based on how they sound, what they look like, and what we expect. And the best thing we can possibly do is try and dismantle that reflex, that learned reflex to say, I know loads about you because of the things that I've interpreted.
Yes, and it's the idea. The unconscious bias is how human beings make sense at lightning speed, and they can often be quite negative assumptions in more toxic cases. Yeah. It's not always helpful.
It's not. And I think that, yes, we do absolutely need to, if we're being chased by a leopard, make sense of the situation. You're not going to turn around to the leopard and say, Mr. Leopard, have you considered that perhaps vegetarianism might be a better way for you to go whilst he's eating your face? But at the same time, we live in a very complicated society and a complex society and a really interesting society where when we do make those, immediate assumptions about people, we do ourselves the greatest disservice because we sort of suspend our ability to engage with someone in a way that's respectful and true to them. And I think that one of the worst things, I think it's very dehumanizing for ourselves and for others. Anyway, that's I'm getting into sort of TED Talk diatribe territory. So I suppose the other things that have shaped me growing up has definitely been a love of language. It's always been a love of language. And again, my parents, I grew up learning French. I didn't have no French background, no family members who are French or anything like that, or any particular reason to have learned it other than it's like, oh, well, you're European, so you'll learn French and you'll learn German and Spanish because they're Romance languages and, they're all nearby, so we should probably learn those. And I think in Britain, we have a fairly negative culture, certainly as white people of oh, well, we're just gonna do English because everybody speaks English and that's what we're gonna do, rather than appreciating the sort of the fact that actually so much of the world is multilingual, per country.
Am I right in you're trilingual? You do speak 3 languages. Is that right?
I attempt to. I'm sort of I attempt to be trilingual. Really, I'm sort of 2 1/4, and I can ask you what your favorite color is in German, and really that's about as far as it goes. But I speak.
One man went to Mo in Swahili.
That was excellent. But you never know when that might come in handy. But so the French side of things, the very convoluted point that I'm making is that my parents always insisted that my brother and I had learned some of the language if ever we visited another country. Yeah. So we should be able to say please and thank you. We should be able to say good morning and good evening.
I think parents, by the way, because they're just encouraging just good grace and being a decent human being.
I think they do. I mean, my parents are they're great people. They're really good people, and they are very. So they're a united front with very differing views, which I think is really interesting because I've seen a whole spectrum of different ideas growing up. My father trained to be a priest, of all things. We're a Catholic family, and he trained to be a priest and then left the seminary to pursue a different calling in financial services. And my mother is far more on the spiritual side at the other end of the spectrum. So I've had 2 very different sort of ideas about life and the universe and everything in it growing up. And I think so. Anyway, so the importance of learning languages, the importance of being respectful, the importance of treating everyone as a human and as an individual, I think has been beaten into me since since the day I was born.
Really lovely through line in what you're saying about the desire to just be present with people and just give them a good listening to. I'm not saying that because that sounds like the podcast. It's just really lovely how there's that connection there. You just are innately interested in what's going on around you.
I think that's one of the biggest gifts of my upbringing is that I also grew up in a very small town. So there are 8,000 people in Peoples. And it's, you have the law of 6 degrees of separation. And I think in Peoples it's about 2, because either you'll know someone or your mum will know someone. So you do have to, yeah, exactly. There was watching. So you do have to be respectful and be interested in people and take that moment to talk. And you can't walk down the high street without speaking with 4 or 5 different people that you know. There's a real community sense there. And the kind of the respect and the sort of treating everyone as a human and taking that time has been definitely beaten into me since I was a wee thing. But the other kind of greatest influence in my life has definitely been books and reading. So the local library, my mum would often call them after school if I hadn't come home for an hour and a half, and they'd be like, yeah, she's in the stacks. She's in the stacks. I was a weird little kid. And I wound up
Stacks, is that the library? Sorry to be.
Yeah, so it's sort of the bookshelves in the library known as the stacks, or I was in the kids section, reading up another book on origami.
Sorry, I love that. I've never heard it put like that. She's in the stacks.
She's in the stacks. And I would be just lurking behind the books. Anyway, but I think that love of reading and that love of learning has definitely been something that's inspired me over time. And I think that if you're curious about other people, if you have a sense of curiosity about all things, then you hopefully won't go too far astray. You'll always have a desire to learn. You'll never hopefully assume that you know it all. Like just the idea of that makes my skin crawl, Chris. Yes, but there is this sense of the more curious you are about things, that I think that hopefully the better a human being you'll wind up being, because the less you think you know it all, the less likely you are to assume. And I think I was very arrogant when I got to university, and I had that sort of that brash teenage confidence of I know all the things. And then I got to university, and I'd gone from being a student who got good grades at school, and suddenly I was in a French class with a whole bunch of kids who'd been doing a hell of a lot better than I had, and it really, I took it as a blow, and I was like, oh my god, the world does not revolve around me, are you joking? So I was a complete dickhead for about 4 years at uni, and then I think hopefully I sort of grew out of my own ego. That's still work in progress.
Self-realization for all of us. It's a great freedom and release when you grow out of your own ego and realize that.
Long may we continue to do so, Chris. And then I think probably the sort of the fourth and final thing. So it's curiosity in language and books. And I suppose the last thing is again, it's that making time for people. I think there's this terrible lie that we don't have enough time. But we don't have enough time. Bollocks. I think you have the time you make. You can't tell me that you don't have enough time to read the book or speak to the person or go to the gym or go for a walk or pursue your passion when you spend 2 hours scrolling on your phone. And I think, and I call this the nightmare rectangle, because it is the nightmare rectangle, and it is access to some of the worst bits of humanity, I think. And I think that it's very tempting to get caught in a sort of a spiral of doom and of comparison and of all these different things. So don't tell me you don't have enough time.
I love that adage, comparison is the thief of happiness, and the interweb is all about comparison. So yes, gnarly dude, as my son would say. Gnarly dude. Wow. Have we got to the end of the 4 things that?
I believe we have. I think that was also a ramble, Chris, on my part.
So So the bish bash bosh is, it's your parents, it's books and reading, it's the love of travel, and I may be giving them in a slightly different convoluted order.
No, doing a great job. And avoiding your nightmare rectangle, making sure that you make enough time.
Avoiding your rectangle. Okay, so we're still shaking your tree, and now we're going to talk about the 3 things that inspire you.
The 3 things that inspire me. Just 3. Without sounding like I'm going for a Miss World award, because I'm sort of definitely feel like I'm veering on this territory. I think, I can't even say this. People, is that gross?
No, what's gross? You just, people inspire you.
But they do. This is the thing. Is that people are a never-ending source of inspiration. I think humanity in general is a never-ending source of inspiration, and I think that there is so much I see other people doing that just speaks to how different it is inside all of our own brains. That I don't think you can help but be flawed by it. I genuinely don't. And I think that it's, depending on your mindset, it can go one of 2 different ways. You can either be awed and inspired, or you can feel victimized and ground down by it. And I think so much of that depends on your attitude. And I think that a lot of it is kind of, again, it's inherited. A lot of it is inherited. This idea that, I've never gone, so none of my family had ever gone to university before me, and perhaps they could have looked at me and said, well, who does she think she is, getting up above herself going to university? What is she going to do with an academic degree that she couldn't do with hard work? Now that's a very binary, dramatic, overblown example. But when you do see people who have gone from having a circumstance or an attitude that they've deliberately chosen for themselves, and they've made something phenomenal out of it, I think that is inspiring. And you see athletes that are inspiring, you see parents that are inspiring, you see students that are inspiring, or just any kind of work. And I think that there's a lot to be said for people being brave enough to sort of veer off a beaten path. And I think that when it comes to inspiration, that is kind of the main source of it, is kind of humanity and action.
Yeah.
And there are lots of,
there's great hope in that as well.
I hope so. I
These
do.
dark times of unprecedented strain, stress, pressure, and yet the desire you have, which I share, is the idea of connecting, the idea of just throwing out lots of boomerangs of connectivity rather than sticks of victimhood is just a really interesting thing.
It is. And I think that there's definitely then there's a duty of care to pass on what you've learned to other people. So as a segue in this, I suppose the second thing that inspires me, and still inspires me and inspired me massively, was the students that I worked with at the University of Aberdeen when I ran the Star Award. And I would sit down with these students, and I guess this is also where the infancy of Olim began, was that I would sit down with the students and I would speak with them, and they would tell me all these amazing things. I still have no one would expect this, a crocheted cuttlefish from a student who also happened to be captain of the basketball team. And I still
fish.
Yes, a crocheted cuttlefish. So he was, not only was he captain of the basketball team, he was also a member of the yarn club and doing an engineering degree in a second language, apart from the other two languages that he spoke.
I've never met who's got a crocheted cuttlefish.
I think I'm the only person I've met that has a crocheted cuttlefish. But the student in question had come to me and said, I just don't see what's going to make a difference on my CV to people. And I sat him down and I said, so just walk me through some of the stuff that you do, and just walk me through what it is that you offer. He's like, okay, well, I mean, I spend my time doing basketball, and I spend my time, I actually do some crochet and I do some stuff. And so we walked through his CV together, and I said, what do you mean there's nothing about you that isn't inspiring? Or what do you mean there's nothing about you that someone isn't going to be interested in? Because what you are is remarkable because of the intersections of all your different identities and all the things that you love doing. And he thought that, people wouldn't want to know about his basketball or his yarn or his extra languages, or the fact that he helped volunteer. I don't know. So all of these different things. And I said, it's remarkable, because if I were to hire an engineer and I had a swathe of all the same engineers with academic results to choose from, what would make the difference for me? And the difference that would be made for me is someone who not only understands the importance of a teamwork in a sport like basketball, but the discipline and the determination and the diligence to see that through, but also someone who has a creative outlet, who isn't going to be held back by, God forbid, preconceived ideas of what men specifically potentially should spend their time doing. And I said, it's ludicrous. I would be choosing the person that was able to be original and confident and pursue the things that they love and want to go for.
Perfect. Yeah.
That's remarkable. And he just sat there and went, okay, that's great. And then shuffled off and wound up getting an amazing internship and doing a brilliant job, just like you knew he would do. And then he came back into my office and gave me this crocheted cuttlefish, which I still have upstairs in my bedroom.
You need to know the answer to this, and I apologise, this is really testing you now, but do you remember his name, just so we can amplify him?
I do, and I'd love to, but I'm going to pronounce it wrongly because I haven't gone over it for a while. But I can add it in the show notes if we're going to do some of those later. But he was remarkable, and I just remember this wonderful 6 foot sort of 3 something basketballer coming up in his, I think he was actually wearing his shorts at the time, and massive hoodie, and then just kind of passing me a cuttlefish to say thanks for helping, and it blew.
And how big are we talking? Your crocheted cuttlefish?
Oh, it's ditty. It's little. It's about probably the size of my palm.
But it's iconic as something, a gift you give, the gift of self. You give somebody a gift, and they'll never forget the context of that. It's like having a precious possession. I love that.
Well, it is a precious possession. So yeah, I think the kind of
and by the way, in personal brand terms, what I love about that as well is that you've just articulated beautifully how you can encourage fellow human beings to just dig a little bit deeper for what is your differentiating factor. What do you bring that nobody else can? And that the crocheted cuttlefish is just a beautiful way to tell that story, really.
Yes, maybe that should be another series of talks, is what's your crocheted cuttlefish.
You
But
heard
I
it
do.
first. That's a great idea. That's your podcast right
That's
there.
my podcast, crumbs. But the other thing I think about it is also, so my sort of final apple of inspiration, I think, is probably the being able to shine a light on that personal branding. So it's being able to say, and I think linguistics is what's given me that, is that ability to hopefully hold a degree of space for people to say, let me just reflect what it is you've told me.
Yeah.
Because sometimes having someone give you a damn good listening to and reflect the things that you do is one of the most valuable things. And I think that that's, I was very interested in pursuing becoming a therapist of some kind, because I think if you can hold a compassionate mirror up to someone's, and that's not necessarily to say that you're going to, coddle or take responsibility for or gloss over things that aren't acceptable, but to hold up a compassionate mirror to say, here's who you are. And here are some of the things I'm hearing you tell me about yourself that are not true, or that are true that you're willfully not listening to, because if you had to listen to them, you'd have to take responsibility for them.
Yeah.
And it's that crux between reaction and responsibility that I think is so important. I mean, the Latin for responsibility, when you break it down etymologically, you have response and ability. Responsibility is your ability to respond to a situation in a thoughtful and effective manner. And that, I think, is one of the biggest things that we as human beings need to start doing for each other, is taking responsibility of our own approaches to things, and helping other people do the same as well.
Lovely. Thank you for that. And so we're going to now, if we may, move into two things that never fail to grab your attention. I know you've been implying a lot of that, but how would you answer that?
Language and people, or food. I mean, can we just kind of out myself as a
Let's add a
person?
third one, food. Nom, 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 nom. Grub as well. I mean, you said a lot about the other two. What's your favourite food?
My favourite food. Oh my God, where do we start? Oh.
So just you've got a snack of choice.
I can't say a margarita because it's not a food.
Margarita.
Margarita, probably. That's not fine. A pizza, but the drink.
Yeah.
Anyone wants to send me a bottle of tequila? That'd be lovely.
This new riff of it, there's a bing bong on the door and then there's a snack of choice delivered to you right this second. It's actually a cocktail, a margarita.
Actually a cocktail. Yeah, probably not at 10 in the morning though.
That's good advice to the people listening as well.
I once heard some great drinks-based advice, which was that if it's blue, it's not for you. And I just feel like that's very, very wise.
Yes, I love that. It's like the blue sweets in M&Ms and Smarties. It's just something about blue and the sort of toxins that arrive at that. We love blue skies, but if it's blue, it's not for you in drink form is almost. I'm sorry we're not ending the program there because that's great.
It's good, isn't it? Yeah.
So that's what's a lovely, beautiful false ending. Now we're going to go with one quirky or unusual fact about you, Eloise. We couldn't know until you tell us.
I mean, I dabbled in Olympic weightlifting, not as an Olympian, not even vaguely as an Olympian. No, I did the sport of Olympic. Yes, I did the sport of Olympic weightlifting for a little while. I think one of the best things about it was being in a workshop with a student. And actually, this is what I do as an icebreaker for them: is I would sit down and I would say, I would like you to turn to your neighbor and I'd like you to tell them one unusual fact about yourself, and then they're going to tell the rest of the room your unusual fact. So you don't have the embarrassment of having to tell the world your weirdness, but you get to share it with a person, and it worked like a dream.
So I love that somebody else points out how weird you are.
Someone else points out your weirdness, which I'm like, that's just mutual, share the mutual weirdness. And that was a really amazing way to get to know the students. And I remember, and they said, so one class went, so Miss Leeson, what's your weird fact? And I went, I do Olympic weightlifting. And one of the guys in the front row went, yeah, whatever. And then he got the eyebrow of doom and he went, I'm sorry. I was like, no, it's fine. I'm 5'2". I'm a very small person. He was like, oh, but what's your max deadlift? I'm like 92.5 kilos. He went, oh yeah, you are strong. Okay, fine. So I like to throw a barbell around. I do the Arnold Schwarzenegger. I pick up the heavy thing and I put down the heavy thing.
So it's not Liam Neeson that is your namesake, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. So you're
I do not. Oh,
so is that bench pressing or is that over your head?
It's a variety of different things. So you have your deadlift, your front squat, your back squat, your clean, your jerk, your snatch, and a whole variety of other things. And you can't say those words without sniggering, can you?
The comedian in me needs to move on now, I think.
No, it's okay. I have many T-shirts of inappropriate.
but that was proof of itself, that list of, I know the word snatch was in there, but there was lots of different words there. that
Yes.
proved you knew what you're talking about. Your back, your
Oh,
front,
thanks.
lovely.
Hooray.
Your hands, your knees, and your bumps and daisies. Lovely. So now we're going to move away from your tree, which has been very beautifully shaken, and I'm loving the through line and the connection of intrinsically being intrigued by and interested by others and wanting and having a desire to connect, which is, may I say, very authentic.
Oh, thank you.
Now we're going to talk about alchemy and gold. When you, Eloise, are at purpose and in flow, what is the alchemy and the gold that you know you love to bring in the work's life or life's work you've chosen to do?
I think some of the alchemy takes place in conversation with people. So when I'm having a purposeful conversation, especially with a client, for example, it's about sitting down and going, tell me who you think you are, and then let's just tease and unpick and just tug on various different threads to see what unravels in the telling of who you think you are. And then let me repeat that back to you in a way that's going to help you see it from a whole new perspective. And that generally is, I guess you could call them alchemical conversations, because it's you have two opposite elements that are coming together, and then something more than the sum of those parts arrives as a result of that. And generally that is some kind of understanding. So it's either a deeper understanding of a brand, or it's a better understanding of oneself, or it's a fresher understanding of what the purpose of that person's work is. And this is where it comes to.
So arriving at the story you most think is important to be telling at this point.
I think that's a good way to sum it up. Yes, I do. And I think that then, so that's one thread of the kind of the alchemy. And then the other part of it is then converting that conclusion. I do a lot of writing, a lot of copywriting, and write websites and write brand handbooks and write articles for people and newsletters, a whole variety of different digital comms. And writing something. I recently had a client, and this was just such a brilliant moment. I had a client who we'd sat down and we'd had the kind of initial conversation, and then he left me to it. And I came back with sort of, and I wouldn't normally do this, but I come back with a full suite of kind of work that I had done. And we sat down together, we went through it, and I put up a couple of quotes and I put up some of the copy and the text. And he sat there and he just went, "You're so good. I've actually got a lump in my throat." And I went, "Wow." And he said that he actually felt quite emotional. The sort of the way that he was reading about his business and what he did was finally the way that he felt about it. But there was a barrier between his own strength so he has lots of different strengths, but he doesn't call himself a natural copywriter, for example. But having someone come in, like you've taken someone's brain and you've put it onto paper in a way that's true to them, and seeing his face light up was just, if I can do that for every single client, I will be a very happy person. And every client is different, so it is going, things will shift and change, but there is something very profound about being able to accurately represent someone if they haven't been able to do that for a long time.
That's such a lovely story of how you alchemically weaved your magic to deliver the gold that gave the client the lump in the throat. I love that.
Thank you.
Beautiful. What a lovely story. And now, Eloise, finally, and thank you for gracing us with your time here in the Good Listening To podcast. Clearly, I'm going to award you with a cake now, if I may, which is to say thank you very much indeed for being here. And the invitation now is a final storytelling metaphor. You're going to put a cherry on the cake, which is the legacy of our conversation as you would like to leave it. Again, it's open to interpretation. It could be stuff like a favourite inspirational quote, advice perhaps to your younger self, or it could be the best piece of advice you've ever been given. Whatever, it's open to you to interpret as you'd like to.
Without being too sort of self-focused and navel-gazing, she says in a podcast where she's spoken for 85% of it. I think the advice to your younger self is always a really interesting question, because my first reaction is, don't be a fanny, like don't be an idiot. And I think that applies to much of my younger self, sort of various different vagaries. But actually, I think what I would go back and say, and what I would say to anybody, is that you are enough. You are enough, and that there is magic in starting. And you are enough even if you don't feel like it, especially if you don't feel like it. And I think that if I could have told myself when I was younger that I was enough, I would have had more bravery and confidence in pursuing a lot of the things that make me very joyful. Now, I wouldn't change a thing about what's happened in my past, apart from some really crashing mistakes, but you learn from them, don't you? But there is something definitely about I think if you can trust that you are enough and extend yourself the same kindness that you would do another person, hopefully, then really good things happen. And I think that there is sort of balls, bravery, and magic in just getting started on whatever it is that you want to do. And sorry, last piece of advice. We'll stop eventually, I promise. But I think that just, and this is another massive segue, but I think we don't spend enough time figuring out what makes us happy. And I don't think there's enough of a focus on that when we grow up. We're taught that we need to be dutiful, and we're taught that we need to be sort of societally compliant, and that, you know, there are a whole variety of different things. And those are different things, by the way, from being respectful and interested in other human beings. But I think that one of the biggest things possible is to look after your own happiness and joy, and to understand what those things are that make you happy, and to pursue them. So for me, you know, the little things that make me happy are walks outside, perfect cherries in a brown paper bag, the first daffodils, and incredibly stormy skies with sun on them, and you know there's a storm, but it's that incredible contrast of smoke and gold. And I would love to know what makes you happy. You know, it doesn't need to be your, you know, Hallmark card, you know, children's smiles and pumpkin patches, but it can be the first cup of coffee. But we don't spend enough time figuring out what makes us happy. So you are enough, get started, figure out what gives you joy, and then crack on.
And I love that hook and interest and intrigue in there. I'd like to find out what makes you happy, because you are indeed a connector, very, very naturally and instinctively. So Eloise Leeson, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here on the Good Listening To podcast. Where can the listeners, should there be any, go to find out more about you and your lovely Olim Comm company on the interweb?
Absolutely. So you can find me lurking, and it is lurking, on Instagram at Olim Comms. So that's OLIMCOMMS, Instagram /Olim Comms. You can find me at my website, which is www.olimcomms.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Eloise Leeson, and you can email me through the contact form on Olim if you have any burning questions or profound feedback, or welcome a GIF. But let's start a conversation. It'd be brilliant to hear from anybody who's interested.
And of course, we can Google Arnold Schwarzenegger or Liam Neeson as well to find
something. You will see. No.
Thank you very much indeed for gracing us with your presence here on the Good Listening To podcast. This has been Eloise Leeson. I am Chris Grimes, and good night.